Quick question. What anime or manga first got you into the otaku life? And is it still the same as you remember it? Let me know your answer in the comments below. Anyway, on to the video. We kick things off with a mad dash through the grim forest. One silhouette is frantically being pursued by two vengeful phantoms, and predictably, the bastard being hunted is the asshole Liam. After his downright loathsome deeds, it seems karma has finally caught up to his hairy ass, and now the shadow of death looms over him. The hateful fucker, true to his cockroach nature, refused to go down so easily. He paused in his pathetic retreat and launched a counterattack on our boys, pelting them with the finger rifle skill. Our Chads, however, were Gs. They easily evaded or tanked the hits, finding no challenge in the pitiful attack. Liam, noticing this, cursed his luck. To think these bastards would push him this far. Well, since it had come to this, he had no choice but to use his trump card. Thinking so, the baboon motherfucker made a beeline out of the forest, heading for the sea in the distance. Upon reaching the shore, he immediately took a fighting stance, resuming his fingering of the boys. Wait, hold up. That doesn't sound right. Let's try that again. He immediately resumed his finger bang on the goddammit. Anyway, he attacked, and our boys dodged, splitting up to divide his attention. For a ranged fighter like himself, such a tactic was particularly effective, as the hateful fool couldn't aim and fire at both of them simultaneously. Our boys, also aware of this, capitalized on the weakness, patiently biding their time for their own counterattack. However, the duo had severely underestimated the wickedness of Liam. Even cornered, the hateful foe was still scheming, deliberately luring them into a trap. And so, to Jeong's surprise, a green silhouette jumped out of the water, catching him completely off guard. What was more surprising was that the ghostly silhouette was someone we already knew, the ponytail Chad, Pauline Nordine. Turns out the Absi Chad had died at some point, morphing into a water ghost. Jeong, taken aback by the strange development, blanked out for a moment. Just what was the French Chad doing there? And was this why the hateful Liam had lured them to this place? The whole situation was so bizarre and confusing to him that even the system notification congratulating them for finding the water ghost was completely ignored. The water ghost, however, wasn't held back by such trivial matters. It immediately clocked our boy, sending him reeling. Jeong, with a grim expression, marveled at the water ghost's absurd strength and speed. If it wasn't for his passive skills, that casual blow would have blown off his arms. Borrowing the momentum, he backpedaled, putting distance between himself and the fiend. Now free from the ghostly clutches, he analyzed the situation. He didn't know how Pauline had morphed into a water ghost, but because of that, they were definitely cooked. Especially since they still had the fucker Liam to worry about. Speaking of the loathsome fool, he finally sighed in relief upon seeing the ghost materialize. Even though the new boss was quite troublesome and had even forced him to retreat pathetically the last time they fought, to him, this was still a favorable outcome. So what if the monster clapped them all? It was still better than being hunted by them. Sometimes the best way to survive was to watch everyone else burn. Flashing Dwayne a cocky smile, he wished the Chad good luck in the upcoming battle. Oh, and just in case he was curious, it was indeed him who led to Pauline's current state. Of course, it wasn't intentional. He'd been scheming and backstabbing. You know, the huge. When the Chad suddenly turned into a water ghost. Turns out killing someone by the sea leads to them morphing into a water ghost. An oversight that almost cost him his life. Anyway, he'd done all that to get Pauline's souls, but because of the sudden transformation, he was forced to escape pathetically. Dwayne, hearing the asshole's rambling, immediately exploded in rage. Even at this point, this Liam bastard continued to surprise him with his trashiness. If he couldn't end this scum of a human, then he'd have no right to call himself the Unit Dwayne. Thinking so, Dwayne leveled up his strength buff skill to level 20. When he did, the skill underwent a bizarre transformation, evolving into the superior grade power of a beast skill. The skill did exactly what the name suggested, granting the wielder the physical abilities of a wild beast. With the new skill in tow, Dwayne lunged at Liam, appearing before the fool in seconds. Liam, stunned by the absurd speed, froze for a second, failing to guard against Dwayne's punch. The hit landed so savagely that Liam's body curved in before being flung into the air. Coughing up a mouthful of blood, Liam's eyes widened in shock. To think the Chad was that powerful. If he didn't immediately lock in, he might very well die here. Thinking so, he aimed at Dwayne, firing a barrage of finger bullets at him. Our boy, however, tanked all the hits, resolutely closing the gap between them. When he finally reached him, he clocked the hateful fucker, sending the fool crashing into the sandy shore. Dwayne, however, didn't escape scot-free. Turns out, in that brief moment of impact, Liam had used a secret technique, inflicting severe damage on him. Although he didn't know exactly what he'd done, the blow was deep enough to mess up his innards. Liam, finally recovering from the onslaught, sighed regretfully. He'd wanted to stab Dwayne's vitals with that blow, but alas, things didn't work out. However, because of that, he'd learned an interesting fact about Dwayne. The Chad had absurd strength skills, but none of them particularly protected his body. That is to say, if he could avoid his gorilla-like strength, then he should be able to inflict decent damage with his nail hook. Speaking of the nail hook, this was a skill that allowed the user to extend their nails and use them as hooks. Jeong, finally remembering he was the MC of this manhwa, spawned in real quick to give some exposition. He warned Dwayne about Liam's regeneration ability, the same cheat-like ability he had. If he was to fight the slimy fiend, he had to be wary of that. With that said, he immediately skedaddled, disappearing to who knows where. The gentle Chad was left pondering the matter. Not only did Liam have a regeneration ability, but he also had a shit ton of potions. Couple that with the obvious trump cards he was hiding, and it was apparent, underestimating him was a one-way ticket to the afterlife. However, the fool wasn't all-powerful. He was at least sure his last hit did a number on him, and if he could press the attack, then avenging the mommies was a possibility. Liam, now all juiced up and fully recovered, challenged Dwayne to a second round. He was particularly interested in paying Dwayne back for that nasty punch earlier. Dwayne, not one to back down in the face of treacherous assholes, immediately pressed the attack. So what if the bastard had insane regeneration and trump cards? All he had to do was create an opening and pummel him to the ground. With that, he lunged forward, blocking and tanking all the finger bullets aimed at him. Liam, still feeling cocky, mocked the giant Chad, calling him foolish for charging at him so openly. Maybe before he could have been caught lacking, but now he was already familiar with his speed. So what could he possibly do? Dwayne, however, didn't reply. He simply entered a punching stance, cocking his arm back. Before Liam could react, he immediately punched the sandy shore, kicking up a huge sand cloud. Liam, taken aback by the odd development, chuckled haughtily at the pathetic stunt. Did Dwayne really think he'd be tricked by something this obvious? No matter what he did next, his moves were predictable. He'd either appear from the right or the left. Either way, when he showed up, he'd have a nasty surprise waiting for him. Smiling grimly, he urged Dwayne to show himself. He'd be sure to kill him this time. Dwayne, however, didn't show himself. He stayed hidden behind the huge curtain of sand. I don't know what kind of fucked up gravity lag has, but this sand cloud sure is taking its time to fall. Liam, equally puzzled by the lagging sand, shouted at Dwayne to show himself, calling him a bitch for hiding. Obviously, Dwayne didn't fall for such petty taunts, and besides, Liam had no right to call anyone a bitch, seeing as he had a mega bitch slap plastered across his face. Like damn, just how hard did Dwayne hit the bastard? Speaking of the gentle Chad, a shadowy phantom suddenly streaked on the right side, hinting at his inevitable counterattack. Liam, noticing this, immediately aimed at the phantom, ready to shoot. However, this turned out to be nothing but a feint. The giant Chad was actually attacking from the left. Liam, having expected this, smiled deviously. He quickly unloaded 2 hot ones on the silhouette, punching holes through the sand curtain. To his shock, this too was a feint. The giant Chad didn't attack from either direction. Instead, he blitzed through the middle, drop-kicking the living shit out of Liam. The blow sent the bastard reeling, causing him to crash pitifully into the hard ground. Despite his grave injuries, our boy didn't let up. He swiftly closed in, preparing another stomp attack on the hateful fellow. Normally, he wouldn't be doing this, but for Liam, this loathsome fucker, he was ready to make an exception. Saying so, Dwayne landed a vicious stomp kick on Liam's knee, causing the bastard to wail in agony. As satisfying as this was to see, it was also such a shame. I mean, his balls were right there. Why didn't he stomp on them fuckers instead? Anyway, I digress. Liam, enraged and in pain, launched his counterattack, pelting Dwayne with a barrage of finger bullets. Our boy, however, easily shrugged off the blows. What were a couple of puny bullets to his Chadly physique? Rather, he held onto Liam's treacherous hand, breaking it like a twig. As he'd said before, it really wasn't in his nature to torture someone, but for some strange reason, Liam's scream sounded like music in his ears. The bastard, clearly frantic, swung at Dwayne, his ghostly claws aiming for his face. Caught off guard by the insidious attack, Dwayne fumbled, barely sacrificing his hand to block the blow. Before he could launch his CHADY counter, probably involving the Wayne Brady principle, the scene switched to Jeong, showcasing his battle with the water ghost. Seems like the author finally remembered who was the top dog in his manhwa and decided to give our boy some screen time. However, currently, Jeong's chattiness was not chattying since he was losing pathetically to the water ghost. Despite his savage slashes, the fiend was eating them like candy, finding no challenge in the blows. Jeong, fed up with the stalemate, blitzed the ghost, sending it flying into the distance. He didn't know what the resilient bastard was made of, but surely with its neck broken, it would be dead, right? Nope. Lag was like, fuck that. This wasn't the place to defeat enemies with wishful thinking and the power of friendship. He could save that bullshit for Naruto. In here, people fought like men, desperate and bloody. And so, to Jeong's surprise, the ghostly fucker got back up, fixing its broken neck like it was nothing. Our boy, cursing his shitty luck, scowled at the fiend, rage evident on his face. He wondered why the ghost had such absurd resilience, high enough to shrug off broken necks. Even if it was lag, this was getting ridiculous. Anyway, seems the best way forward was to chop off its neck or mince it to pieces. Only then would its death be assured. However, that was easier said than done, since his bone blade couldn't even scratch it. Not to mention, the ghost wasn't the only foe he had to worry about. There was still Liam in the equation. But he couldn't afford to be bothered by him right now. The situation had developed to a state where any carelessness from them would get them instantly killed. So, as much as he wanted to drag that loathsome fool into the fray and use him as a meat shield, he couldn't do so. All he could do was trust in Dwayne to handle him and trust in himself to solo the water ghost. As if it had sensed Jeong's resolve, the ghost roared, its voice bellowing out like sound waves. Jeong, identifying this as the signal to lock the fuck in, immediately entered a fighting stance. He quickly deduced that his current strength alone wouldn't be enough to defeat the foe. If he wanted to do that, then significant upgrades had to be made. And so, with that in mind, our boy burned through his souls, leveling up his swordsmanship, pain relief, lizard tail, and tough skin skills to levels 10, 5, 3, and 7, respectively. With that done, Jeong braced for impact, tanking the ghost's lunge attack with strained ease. Acting quickly, he immediately countered, landing a vicious kick on its flank. For any living being, this could have been considered an effective attack. One aimed to immobilize the enemy through pain. However, since the water ghost didn't feel pain, nor did it fear it, the attack ended up amounting to dog shit. Jeong, noticing this, immediately switched to the next ace up his sleeve, lightning shock. Channeling his Thor-type shit, he bathed the ghost in brilliant lightning, knocking it back. And I don't know if it's just me, but somehow the water ghost looks hella zesty in this scene. Or maybe it's hitting the nay-nay, who knows. Anyway, the blow from the attack sent it backpedaling, allowing Jeong a well-deserved reprieve. Analyzing the foe, he noticed that electric attacks didn't work on it either. So far, he'd managed to do 0 damage to it, and if that continued, he'd find himself in a troublesome situation. Desperate and cornered, he contemplated using the Door of Limitation skill but swiftly shot it down. He had no idea what the fallout would be for using the skill. If it turned out to be a massive depletion of his stamina, then he'd truly be fucked. Finding it wise to play it safe, he instead leveled up his strong bones and calm breathing skills. With the 2 skills, he could enhance the power of his bone blade and also decrease the stamina consumption when using said skill. Though not nearly as effective as he'd liked, this was all he could do for now. As he charged at the ghost, Jeong reflected on the actions he should take. Methodical thinking and planning wouldn't work on such a foe. What he needed was something else. Something primal. He had to move instinctively, use unconventional methods to throw it off. And although it might sound flashy when he said it like that, what the bastard actually meant was that he'd be fighting hella dirty in this fight. Acting on this, Jeong threw sand into the ghost's eyes, temporarily blinding it. He capitalized on this opening, spawning behind the fiend, his bone blade at the ready. Even if it was sturdy, he wanted to see if it could still fight back after getting decapitated. With this thought, he decisively swung at the ghost, offering a gentle prayer for Pauline to finally rest in peace. This prayer, however, was bitch-slapped away by Lag when Pauline briskly raised his arm, using it to block the incoming slash. Channeling its horror-type shit, the ghost leaned back, scaring the shit out of our boy. Before he could react, the ghost countered, landing a back kick on his ass, forcing him to cough up a mouthful of blood. Jeong, now backpedaling from the blow, cursed his shitty luck. Even while fighting dirty, this bastard still refused to die. Not only that, but his bone blade upgrades turned out to be straight trash. Well, since it had come to this, he had no choice but to go hard. If long and narrow won't do it, then he'd have to go with short and girthy. Pause. In this state, he was sure he'd be able to do a number on the resilient fucker, especially if he aimed at the neck it had been instinctively protecting. As Jeong was still organizing his big brain plots destined to be bitch-slapped by the water ghost, the fiend in question was making some bizarre moves. Crouching down, it lunged at our boy, its arm performing a strange clawing motion. When it did so, a ghostly black aura enveloped its hand, causing alarm bells to go off in Jeong's mind. Although he didn't know what the hell it was, his spidey senses were tingling, warning him of the impending fucktitude. And true to his instincts, the ghost clawed forward, hurling a black beam of death towards him. Jeong, overwhelmed by primal fear, stared gravely at the attack. He didn't know what bullshit hole the ghost pulled this move from, but one thing was for certain. This was the closest he'd ever come to death since his regression. Not only was the attack ridiculously fast, making dodging impossible, but also bizarrely threatening, as if death was inevitable once hit by it. As things stood, his chatty ass might very well ascend to heaven after this blow. Before the attack could land and effectively kickstart an epic reunion with Garcia Mommy, we switched scenes to the bloody battle with Dwayne. The Chad, having narrowly blocked the lethal blow, clasped Liam's hand, yanking his bleeding arm from his ghastly claws. Applying pressure, he warned the bastard not to have any foolish fantasies of dying easily. He was to suffer so much that death would feel like paradise to him. Saying so, Dwayne pulled and twisted, breaking Liam's arm like a bloody twig. Overwhelming pain assaulted Liam, driving him to the brink of insanity. He shouted at Dwayne, promising to kill him in the most agonizing way possible. Dwayne, however, ignored the fool. He told him to shut his hole. If it wasn't for the possibility that he would turn into a water ghost after dying, then he would have long killed his hateful ass. That being said, just because he couldn't kill him didn't mean he couldn't make him wish he was dead instead. Saying so, Dwayne clocked the shit out of Liam, feeding the loathsome fucker a black knuckle sandwich. Dust clouds blew from the attack, and Liam, the loving recipient of this generous meal, had his face completely rearranged. Never had I ever thought I'd get this much satisfaction from watching a bastard bleed. But honestly, I believe I'm not the only one. Most of you are probably feeling the same way. And judging by Dwayne's expression, our boy is equally ecstatic. We switch scenes back to Jeong. Our boy, unlike us, was currently shitting his pants. Forget joy. He was instead in the deepest pits of hell, with the Grim Reaper gently pecking on his lips. No matter how hard he tried, he just couldn't find a feasible solution to his current predicament. All his skills and equipment were useless, and the only choice left was to somehow tank it and pray for the best. As he was still resigning himself to fate, a Chad in shiny armor came along, saving his doomed ass from death. Dwayne, with his power of a beast skill, roared at the claw attack, eating away at its absurd power. Jeong, capitalizing on this weakness, slashed apart the death beam, barely clinging to his life in that desperate moment. The ghost, however, wasn't done with its offensive. It immediately pressed the attack, lunging decisively at our boy. Caught off guard by the relentless barrage, Jeong tanked a punch from the water ghost, causing his innards to tremble violently. Dwayne, jumping back in, clocked the ghost, sending it reeling into the distance. With that assist, Jeong finally got a breather, which he used to settle his chaotic state. Done with the adjustments, our boys immediately pressed the attack, leaving no room for the ghost to adapt. Performing a jump attack, Jeong slashed off the ghost's hand, bathing his short sword with its blood. Dwayne, not to be outdone, charged back in, landing a brutal low kick on the fiend's leg. The fiend, however, was done playing punching bag. It countered Dwayne's blow, connecting a double punch to his chest. Jeong, capitalizing on the opening from its wild swing, lunged back in, his bone blade screaming murder. On the other end, Dwayne also pressed forward, effectively trapping the ghost in a pincer attack. Finding itself caught between two giants, the ghost had no choice but to abandon protecting its neck and face both sides simultaneously. Our boy, noticing this, smirked widely. This was the chance he'd been waiting for. With the ghost unable to protect its neck, this was the best moment to slash off its hateful head. And so, with that thought, Jeong pressed forward, nimbly dodging the ghost's counterattack. Borrowing from his swing momentum, he delivered a nasty slash to the fiend's neck, hoping to decapitate the fool. However, the boss's neck turned out to be hella sturdy, forcefully blocking the sword slash. At that critical moment, Dwayne spawned the fuck in, connecting a savage punch to the ghost's face. Under Dwayne and Jeong's collective attacks, the fiend finally succumbed, losing its head in glorious fashion. With that, the battle ended, and the Chad Pauline was finally freed from his torturous fate. Jeong, recalling he still had another asshole to handle, asked Dwayne about Liam. The gentle Chad told him not to worry. Considering the state Liam was in, he was practically dead. In fact, there was no need to tell him. He could see for himself. However, when he turned around to show Jeong, the bastard Liam was nowhere to be seen. Dwayne, visibly shocked, quickly ran to the bloody shore, wondering where the cockroach motherfucker had gone. Even in that state, had that hateful bastard really escaped? The MC, analyzing the blood trails, deduced that Liam must have escaped into the sea, a fact that made tracking him insanely difficult. Dwayne, however, was adamant. He insisted on chasing down Liam. With his injured state, he couldn't have gone far. Jeong immediately brushed off the idea, instead focusing on something else. He asked Dwayne if there was a possibility Liam would turn into a water ghost if he died in the sea. Dwayne replied that he wasn't sure. Even if the bastard drowned, the system might treat it as his technical kill, so there was no way to tell. All they could do was hope for the best. Jeong agreed, though inwardly, he was hella skeptical. This was L.A.G. Wishful thinking never ended well in that hell. So before shit hit the fan, which it inevitably would, he told Dwayne to bounce. They were leaving that bitch. We switched scenes to the shore of the sea. Our boy, always a merciful Chad, was conducting a short funeral for the Poppy Pauline. Although they'd only known the French Chad for a little bit, in that time, he'd proven to be a good comrade. So this was the least they could do. Offering a gentle prayer, Jeong wished the Chad a smooth transition into the afterlife. Hopefully, in that paradise, he'd get all the croissants and baguettes to satiate his French desires. Done with the manly tears moment, our boys immediately shifted their attention to the system notification. As you'd expect, it announced the completion of the main mission and side mission, specifically, finding the water ghost. Because of this deed, the two recipients, Jeong Big Daddy Hyeok and Dwayne The Rock Smith, would be rewarded as previously promised. They would both receive a random piece of equipment themed after the water ghost. For Dwayne, the equipment was the water ghost's arm. When equipped, it would buff physical ability in proportion to his agility stat, and additionally, it would grant the passive skill, Tough Skin, level 10. For Jeong, it was the water ghost's leg. Similar to the arm piece, it also provided a buff to physical ability in proportion to his agility stat. However, the passive skill granted was different. In his case, it was Stride Reducer, probably a movement-type skill. Anyway, with the new drip, our boys were officially ready to leave that hell. Dwayne, taking the moment to voice the obvious, asked Jeong how they were meant to cross the seemingly endless sea. Jeong replied that he need not worry. While he was being violated by the water ghost earlier, he'd happened to spot a boat off in the distance. Using that, they should be able to cross the sea. And so, the two Chads, now devoid of the mommies they once had, set off on their next adventure, hope evident in their hearts. If L.A.G had any shred of decency, it would send some baddies their way. However, they didn't hold out hope for that, especially since the sadistic author would just kill them off again. We switch scenes to the two Chads still braving the boundless sea. Dwayne, suspiciously more talkative than usual, worriedly asked Jeong if it was okay to proceed like that. They still couldn't see the end of the sea, after all. Jeong, still calm, replied that it was cool. Maybe Dwayne hadn't noticed, but the currents were subtly leading them in a specific direction. If he were to guess, then their destination should be at the end of said currents. Dwayne, still feeling uneasy, wanted to issue an objection when suddenly the whole boat trembled, violently thrashing on the chaotic sea. Taken aback, the two Chads immediately went on high alert, their focus shifting to the churning water. Dwayne, arguably with the worst timing in history, suddenly shouted at Jeong, letting him know he had something to confess. Jeong, obviously sensing where this was going, immediately shut down the sussy Chad. Just because he was maidenless didn't mean he wanted to explore the famous Brokeback Mountains. Dwayne, however, told him to cut the bullshit. That's not what he wanted to say. Instead, his real concern was that he couldn't swim. Jeong, hearing this, exclaimed incredulously, What kind of bullshit stereotype was Dwayne on about? Surely, as a modern-day black man, he should know how to swim, right? Dwayne, however, told him to chill. He was down with the culture, but he really couldn't swim. If the ensuing battle ended up being a water fight, then he'd truly be useless. Before Jeong could rack his brain for a solution, a silhouette jetted out of the water, cleaving their boat in two. The silhouette, to the duo's disbelief, was actually the asshole Liam, back to torment them even after death. Jeong, cursing the persistent motherfucker, drew his bone blade, rage evident on his face. Even after dying and turning into a water ghost, this cockroach Liam still insisted on making things difficult for them. Well, to hell with it. He would make sure to finish off the bastard this time. Saying so, Jeong launched his electric blast, bathing the ghostly phantom in blue. Liam, however, just tanked the hits, grabbing Jeong by the throat. Before Dwayne could react, Liam swiftly dove back into the sea, carrying Jeong along with him. Our boy, left dazed and confused, frantically planned his next move, worry etched on his face. He considered diving in after Jeong but quickly remembered that he couldn't swim. If he did so, then he'd only be a liability to the big unit. Then should he stay there? No, that wasn't an option either. Because of that asshole Liam, the boat was broken beyond repair, and it was just a matter of time before it completely collapsed. Surviving on it was definitely not an option. As he was still contemplating his next step, two new water ghosts jumped out of the sea, scaring the shit out of him. Dwayne, understandably shocked, stared at the water ghosts, wondering where these fuckers had even come from. That aside, what was this dude doing with a basketball in L.A.G? Was the author high or something? Well, it's not like he had the luxury to jest. Now was the time to lock the fuck in. We switch scenes to Jeong, still being dragged into the depths. Our boy, having expected this, immediately activated his water-breathing skill, taking huge gulps to steady himself. Some might be stunned by such developments. But for him, a regressor, this was just another Tuesday. He, more than anyone, knew how sadistic L.A.G was and had always been prepared, stocking up on the relevant skills. However, even if that was the case, he still found himself struggling, unable to pry Liam's hand from his neck. Not to mention, Liam wasn't the only ghost he had to be wary of. From the looks of it, this sea had turned into a graveyard for the players in B531, and now that graveyard was wide open, releasing all its inhabitants to hunt his sorry ass. Jeong, resolute not to die so pathetically, called upon his bone blade, immediately morphing it into its second form. Even though Liam had turned into a water ghost, that didn't mean his previous injuries were gone. Rather, the sweet damage Dwayne had dealt him was still evident on his body. If Jeong wanted to survive this ordeal, then he had to capitalize on said damage and pave a way for himself to safety. Thinking so, Jeong savagely slashed off Liam's arm, kicking himself free from the bastard. With that done, our boy immediately prepared to leave, wanting no part in the smoke the other ghosts promised. However, before he could move, he suddenly saw a massive wall in front of him, causing him to hesitate. Jeong, brows furrowed, wondered what the hell was going on. From what he could remember, there wasn't a wall in the sea when he was still above water, so what the fuck was this? Could it be that L.A.G had hidden the door to the next room below the sea just to fuck with them? Well, this was L.A.G, so it was entirely possible. However, something about this wall gave him a very bad feeling. As he mulled it over, Jeong suddenly realized why the wall gave him the creeps. It wasn't a wall at all. Rather, it was the skin of a stupidly humongous being. And that said being was now wide awake. Its ghastly eye locked onto Jeong. Predictably, our boy said, "Fuck that." He immediately turned to flee. Only a lunatic would stick around and fish in such troubled waters. But despite his quick and borderline cowardly response, how could the beast let him escape so easily? It quickly opened its mouth, sucking in all the water in the surrounding area. Jeong, caught up in the turbulent currents, was also properly sucked, his soul almost leaving his body. However, despite all this, he still wasn't deterred. He swiftly said deuces to the big bastard, turned around, and swam with all his might. Under the intense pressure of death, our boy gave it his all, using every ounce of strength to escape. And as unbelievable as it was, he finally figured out what was chasing him. It turned out to be a whale. A big-ass, big-back mutant whale, a special variant found only in L.A.G. Jeong, delighted by his findings but still undoubtedly cooked, doubled his speed, doing everything in his power to swim against the sucking force. Unfortunately, even this fell short. and our boy was reluctantly pulled into the whale's mouth, powerless to stop it. The end. Psych. I'm just fucking with you. How could our boy die so easily? After being swallowed up and drifting in darkness for what seemed like an eternity, a system notification sounded, welcoming him to room B54. Jeong, understandably confused, wondered which idiot came up with the brilliant idea to make a whale's stomach a challenge room. If he found that perverted bastard, he'd be sure to whoop his ass. The system, however, was unbothered by his ramblings. It swiftly explained the room's mission. The main mission was to kill that which looked like a human, but was not. It further added that once the imposter was killed, the one who pretends to be human would be enraged. Honestly, I don't know if the translation is just ass or if something else is going on. However, from what I can gather, there are 2 imposters in the room. The main goal is to kill the first imposter, but doing so would piss off the second imposter, making things even more dangerous. So in essence, the goal was the same as usual. Fuck shit up and survive. Jeong, still kneeling in the darkness, switched his focus to the 3rd system notification. This panel highlighted the rewards promised once the main goal was completed: 30 souls and a random passive skill. It also highlighted the bonus side mission, which was to kill the second imposter. If he did that, he'd be given an additional reward, specifically, a rune currently owned by the second imposter. Done with the mission details, Jeong analyzed his surroundings. Unfortunately, the place was so dark that his casual analysis yielded no results. Activating his Owl Eye skill, a skill that, honestly, I genuinely don't remember him getting, he could finally pierce the darkness and see as clearly as day. Our boy, now with his sight back, groped the walls, trying to get a feel for how sturdy they were. To his shock, he realized that, contrary to the soft, wet, and mushy feel you'd expect from a whale's innards, the walls were surprisingly sturdy. In fact, they had the same indestructible structure as the walls of the various rooms he'd tested before. That is to say, the stomach of the whale was a true and bona fide room, one able to lead him to the 6th basement floor, if he conquered it. Although he still couldn't wrap his mind around how such a thing was possible, he chalked it up to this being L.A.G. Anything was possible in that hell. Deciding not to dwell on it, Jeong inevitably had his thoughts wander to the CHADY. He sincerely hoped the unit survived, even if the possibility of that happening was low. Damn it, of all the black stereotypes Dwayne could have chosen to portray, why the fuck did he pick not knowing how to swim? That was such bullshit. Because of that, he might very well lose his best comrade in that hell. Well, it had already happened, so there was no point in fretting over it now. His mission remained the same. He would survive, conquer, and escape L.A.G, even if he had to do it alone. Acting on this, Jeong resolutely made his way down the gloomy corridor. Well, it couldn't really be called a corridor, more like the innards of a whale. Or, in other words, he was deep in them guts. After walking for a while, Jeong heard a low rustling sound from up ahead, causing him to pause. Though it was still indiscernible, he could vaguely identify it as the sound of footsteps. And if there were footsteps, then it only meant one thing. He wasn't the only one alive there. Acting quickly, Jeong immediately summoned his bone blade and entered his fighting stance, ready for whatever shit might fall. However, even after waiting for a bit, the other party didn't make their move. It seemed they too had sensed Jeong and responded accordingly. Our boy, mulling it over, deduced that the other party must be setting up an ambush just as he had been doing. Well, if that was the case, like hell he'd let them prepare. He'd rather hit their ass with a preemptive attack, catching them off guard. Acting on this, Jeong swiftly made a beeline for the corner, his electric shock sizzling in his palm. When he got there, he decisively launched his attack, hoping to catch the stalker lacking. However, the creepy fellow pulled a reverse Uno on his ass, catching him lacking. Just when he thought he had the upper hand, the stranger blasted him with a light skill, effectively blinding him. Though not particularly powerful in terms of physical damage, the light skill, when used properly, as in this case, could instantly nerf the attackee's fighting potential. Jeong, now finding himself in a perilous situation, cursed his rashness. If only he'd been more patient, he wouldn't have fallen for such a simple trap. Well, it had already happened, so there was no point in beating himself up over it. From his calculations, he'd need a couple of seconds to fully recover his eyesight. However, that didn't mean he couldn't fight back. Employing his rich combat experience and MC plot armor bullshit, he quickly deduced the assailant's position and decisively swung at them. However, the slippery fellow nimbly dodged his attack, rendering it useless. Jeong, picking up on a new trail, swiftly launched another attack, bathing the corridor in lightning. Unfortunately, even this missed, making the total L count 2. Our boy, tired of taking L's, decided on a tactical retreat, hopefully buying enough time to recover. He rapidly backpedaled, putting distance between himself and the enemy. After a bit of vigilant waiting, his vision gradually cleared, enabling him to see his attacker at last. To his, or rather my, delight, the new frenemy wasn't a monster but instead a gothic mommy doing the Spider-Man pose. However, just because the author heard my prayers and gifted us another baddie didn't mean our boy could relax. From their short exchange earlier, he'd identified her as a formidable enemy, one capable of giving even him a hard time. The gothic baddie, eyeing our boy warily, praised him for his rich combat instincts. Even when blinded, he could still trace her and attack in her direction, an act that greatly surprised her. However, as much as she could glaze him all day long, it was time to stop fucking around. She let him know she had no desire to fight him, so she'd very much appreciate it if he didn't attack her as well. Upon hearing the subtle hints of cooperation, both I and Jeong immediately identified her as a potential mommy. Specifically, the mommy Kara, gothic girl Levine. Her public attribute was that pain and damage would be doubled whenever she received a physical attack. Currently, her highest skill level was 13. Jeong, obviously less thirsty than I am, questioned Kara on how he could trust her. This was L.A.G after all. Words didn't mean shit in that place. Kara replied that her words were genuine. If she'd wanted to attack him, she would have done so earlier instead of restraining herself. Jeong, warily eyeing the baddie, noted that she wasn't showing any obvious signs of hostility. However, he'd be a fool to believe what she showed. Not once or twice had he been fucked over by innocent-looking people, so it was best to be careful. Addressing Kara, he asked her how long she'd been in that room. Kara replied that it had been approximately 10 hours. She then emphasized her earlier response, saying she truly had no desire to fight him. Not for a couple of souls, at least. To her, it was better to team up and kill monsters rather than attack and kill fellow humans. Jeong, analyzing the naive baddie, asked her if she was alone. Kara confirmed this, explaining that all her companions had died in the previous room. As for what room she meant by previous, it was room B531. The same room Jeong had just left. Our boy, mulling it over, noted that the mysterious water ghosts he'd seen at the end were most likely Kara's companions. If that was so, then her story had a bit of credibility. Kara, on the other hand, was equally eyeing our boy, utilizing her filming equipment skill to study him. And yes, I shit you not, the skill is actually called filming equipment. I don't know what fucked up naming sense the author has, but hey, it is what it is. The MC, noticing her glowing eyes, told her to stop wasting stamina and whip out her light skill. She might not know this, but unlike her half-baked filming equipment skill, oh god, what a stupid name, he could actually see her quite clearly. Kara, enlightened and a bit panicked, immediately deployed her light skill, letting its glow cover the gloomy corridor. Jeong, analyzing the glow, identified it as the light that flashbanged his eyes earlier. To think Kara had actually leveled it up to M rank, an action that greatly puzzled him. As far as he knew, the light skill was just a basic skill, so why level it up that much? Or was there a hidden component he was missing? Well, no point stressing over it. The baddie had the right to do whatever she wanted. Speaking of the baddie, she asked Jeong what he planned to do. Would he believe her words, or would they part ways there? Jeong, always the gentleman, swiftly deactivated his bone blade. He too had no desire to fight and kill pointlessly. Saying so, he calmly walked past Kara, heading deeper into the corridor. After walking for a while, he casually turned and rizzed Kara. What was she doing just standing around? Didn't she want to go with the big poppy? Well, it was completely up to her, so she could decide. Kara, a bit flustered by our boy's CHADY aura, stuttered for a bit before following suit. Like hell she'd miss out on such an opportunity. With that, a new baddie joined the squad, and we immediately switched to them walking deeper into the dark corridor. Kara, taking advantage of the moment, asked Jeong about his situation. Had he been alone the whole time? Jeong replied that he had a team, although most of them were dead already. Kara, picking up on this, asked if they were in the same situation. Jeong denied this, explaining that in his case, one of his comrades had managed to survive, though they were eventually separated. Kara asked why that was the case, and Jeong replied that it was out of their control. The monsters had attacked, forcing them to split up and him to get sucked into that room. However, he was not particularly worried about his companion. The dude was a CHADY unit, so he was sure he'd survive somehow. As they talked, Jeong's steps gradually slowed until he completely stopped. Gazing forward, he visibly scowled at the lingering smell of blood in the air. Addressing Kara, he warned her to be careful. Shit might get active soon enough. The gothic mommy, also picking up on the smell, asked Jeong if the scent was coming from the hidden silhouette off in the distance. Jeong confirmed this, though he added that he sensed no movement from the fellow. From the looks of it, the only way to learn more was to get closer. And so the duo cautiously advanced until the shadowy silhouette was completely revealed. It turned out to be a dude with his heart completely removed. Kara, gazing at the corpse, stated that she knew him. He was one of the bastards that had killed her friends in the last room. Jeong, studying the crime scene further, noted that there weren't any signs of monsters attacking. From the looks of it, this seemed like a murder committed by humans. Kara wasn't particularly surprised by this. She told Jeong that the group that had attacked her team were precisely the kind of scum who would kill anyone if it benefited them. Jeong, mulling it over, stared deeper into the darkness. If what Kara said was true, then the bastards must be up ahead. Probably up to no good. However, even with that being said, something about the baddie's story didn't make sense to him. If her whole team was wiped out, then how did she escape, without injuries at that? Kara, hearing the question, sighed sadly, her eyes downcast. She let Jeong know that the attack was an ambush. They were facing off against the fishmen when suddenly a group of 4 ambushed them from the rear, causing significant casualties to their group. Deeming it a lost battle, she, alongside Pauline, made a run for it, barely escaping with their lives. Hearing the mention of the French Chad, Jeong gave more credibility to her story. From the looks of it, the gothic baddie wasn't faking it. Turning to the strange corpse, he asked her to tell him more about the assailants. Kara replied that of the 4, there was a figure with dark hair, but she didn't see his face clearly. Obviously, another one was the now dead bastard before them. As for the remaining 2, one was an abnormal old man with white hair and a mustache, while the other was an asshole with the distinct characteristic of shooting out his nails like bullets. Jeong, hearing the last description, immediately identified him as Liam. Only that loathsome fucker had that distinct skill. However, that begged the question. Why did Liam abandon the group and eventually seek them out to partner up? It didn't make sense. Kara, unaware of his inner thoughts, continued with her sad girl monologue. She confessed that Pauline had died to Liam's attacks while trying to escape, and she, like a coward, had capitalized on that moment to get away. Although shameful, that's how she survived, and if Jeong wanted to, he could go ahead and criticize her. Jeong, however, consoled the baddie. He let her know he had no intentions of criticizing her. Besides, it wasn't her fault. Anyone would have reacted the same way when faced with the same situation. Channeling his Fang Yuan type shit, he told the baddie that life was all that mattered. Only fools would die for stupid things like revenge and bravado. In this life, true bravery was surviving no matter what. Only when alive would you have the chance to take the next step. And besides, with how things ended up, it could be said that Pauline's grudge was somewhat resolved. Kara, hearing this, puzzlingly asked what he meant. Jeong replied that Liam, the bastard, had a bit of history with them. When they met, they made sure Liam went swimming with the fishes. Quite literally. So that is to say, of the original 4 attackers, 2 were now dead, and only 2 remained. Kara, hearing this, heaved a sigh of relief. At least some of her comrades' grudges had been resolved. However, if this fool was here, didn't it mean the other 2 were probably lurking nearby? Jeong, always the chill Chad, told her not to worry about it. They'd find out soon enough anyway. Kara, taking the hint, immediately dropped the issue. Instead, she asked Jeong if she'd passed the test. Upon Jeong's feigned puzzlement, she told him to cut the bullshit. It was quite obvious he was testing her. Testing to see whether she was trustworthy or not. Well, what was his conclusion? Did he deem her reliable or nah? Jeong, taken aback by her acute senses, replied passively. He let the baddie know that she had barely passed. Of course, this was a lie. With how desperately maidenless he was, any mommy would pass the trust test ASAP. Kara, however, had no idea how severely parched Jeong was. She falsely chalked up his response to him being cold. Well, not that it bothered her. It was actually better if he didn't trust so easily. Our boy, tactically switching the topic, questioned Kara about her individual battle prowess. Did she have enough strength to solo a fight? Kara replied that she was blessed with them hands. So long as she wasn't ambushed, she could guarantee a victory against most players. As she was still self-glazing, rustling and groaning sounds came from up ahead, causing them to stop. The duo, now on high alert, watched attentively as a bloody hand rounded the corner, followed by a severely injured man. The bastard, with a gaping hole in his flank, desperately called out to them, begging to be saved. However, upon learning that he was one of the two attackers, Jeong instead entered a battle stance, ready to fuck shit up. This, however, wasn't necessary, as the Mohawk motherfucker soon toppled, dying pathetically due to his wounds. Kara, taken aback, asked Jeong what was up with the treacherous fool. Jeong replied that, judging by his familiar wounds, he must have been done in by the same person who killed the other dude. As for why he'd done so, he had no idea. As he was still mulling it over, a new silhouette rounded the corner, catching him off guard. Jeong, visibly spooked, wondered how the creepy dude had sneaked up on him, bypassing his flawless detection. Not only that, but the old perv wasn't human, as evidenced by the fact that his character panel displayed his characteristic instead of his public attribute, as is the case when encountering a monster. Speaking of the character panel, it highlighted the monster's name, Zepekiyo. Its characteristic was that it was similar to humans, but not quite. Currently, its highest skill level was 18. The crazy motherfucker, eyeing the duo, praised them for looking like a great couple before losing all interest in them. It then shifted its focus to the dead bastard, casually collecting his souls. Jeong, witnessing this, immediately went on high alert. Never in his multiple regressions had he ever heard of a monster like this. Not only that, but the bastard seemed capable of using souls, which was truly outrageous. If he were to guess, then this being was the true reason Liam abandoned that group and sought them out. Zepekiyo, with a crazed look in its eyes, finally turned to face the duo, urging them to partner up with it. Jeong, however, ignored that bullshit. Who would be crazy enough to team up with a monster? And besides, the fact that this thing could freely move between rooms meant it wasn't to be underestimated. How could he add such a time bomb to his squad? Thinking to this point, our boy immediately locked the fuck in, burning his souls to level up his skills. He leveled up Calm Breathing and Electric Shock to levels 15 and 10. Upon reaching level 10, Electric Shock underwent a qualitative change, morphing into the superior skill Electric Level 1. With this new skill, he gained the ability to freely morph and shape the electricity to his desired form. Done with his preparation, Jeong swiftly entered a fighting stance. Zepekiyo, noticing the duo had no intentions of submitting, immediately changed its tone, instantly becoming more aggressive. It warned the duo not to refuse, as refusal meant they'd be killed by him. On top of that, if they still refused, then he'd make sure to properly entertain Kara, giving her a bit of this and that. Damn, this bastard. Kara, hearing that, immediately got enraged, yeeting the pervert bastard with a fireball. Turns out the casual light she was using was actually a level 9 fireball, capable of outrageous damage. Jeong, realizing this, sweated slightly. However, because of that, he was finally convinced of Kara's sincerity. She truly had no desire to fight humans. Locking back in, our boy manifested his electric skill, morphing the currents into a whip shape. Addressing Kara, he laid out the battle plan. He'd restrict Zepekiyo's movements while she attacked the fucker from the back. With that said, Jeong immediately lashed out his whip, trapping the beast in an electric bind. The bastard, tanking through the electric shock, threatened Jeong to think through his actions carefully. If he truly rejected his offer, then he'd have no option but to kill them. Jeong, barely keeping the beast at bay, cursed his shitty luck. Who would have thought electric skills would be so useless in L.A.G? Well, it wasn't completely useless. It was definitely dealing damage to Zepekiyo. It was only that the fiend felt no pain, hence tanking most of the damage. Anyway, if that was the case, then he might as well go hard. He had a new mommy to impress after all. Zepekiyo, however, didn't want our boy collecting them mommy merit points. It would rather die than watch him pull a bad one. As such, it stubbornly tanked the scorching electricity, narrowing the gap between them. Jeong, cursing the fiendish bastard, stared tensely as it charged at him. Who would have thought the freak would disregard its own injuries just to kill him? In fact, it was so ruthless that its eye popping out barely made it flinch. However, all things had a weakness, And for Zepeckio, this bastard, it was its humanly appearance. Turns out losing an eye for it was a bigger deal than Jeong expected. Not because it did damage to it. Nah, fuck that. It didn't care about that at all. Rather, it was because losing the eye meant it no longer looked human, something it paid particular attention to. Realizing its eye was gone and its alleged beautiful face was incomplete, Zepeckio burst out in rage, wailing at the top of its lungs. He threatened to kill Jeong, boil his bones, and drink their soup. Damn, when did this become a xianxia manhua? The bastard, completely livid, mastered its strength, forcefully breaking the electric binding. Now free, it mad-dogged Jeong, intending to deliver on its earlier promise. Our boy, sweating bullets, cursed the fiend some more. Why couldn't it be a team player and die obediently? And besides, what was this bullshit about losing its beautiful human face? Since when was this bastard considered beautiful? As he was still contemplating the absurdity of it all, Kara called out, instructing him to move aside. With ample preparation, her attack was finally ready, and she didn't hesitate to light shit up. Channeling her Escanor-type shit, she unleashed a volley of fireballs at Zepeckio, flaming his ass. The fucker, now nice and crispy, backpedaled from the attack, wheezing pathetically from the damage. However, it quickly collected itself, locking back onto our chads. Jeong, taken aback by this, wondered what was up with the fiend. Although it seemed crispy, it didn't seem to have received any fatal wounds. In a sense, it was both damaged and unscathed, which made no fucking sense. Kara, also picking up on this, asked Jeong worriedly what they'd do. Jeong replied that it was simple. They'd light his ass up once again, and if that didn't work, then they'd do it again and again, up till the bastard finally croaked. He refused to believe there was anything unkillable in L.A.G, not after all the waifus he'd lost. Locking the fuck in, our boy decided to launch his pièce de résistance. Maybe because he hadn't used it before, some of you chads might have forgotten he had it. However, how could I, your poppy, forget about it? In fact, I had been dreaming of this, waiting for the moment our boy unleashed this masterpiece. And so, when that arm split apart and that bone shot out, I knew it was time. Time to lock all the fuck in. Jeong, equally excited, wheezed heavily from the skill's activation. Although the move was OP, it came at a significant cost, rendering his arm immobile. However, it was also because of this cost that he knew it was great, and he couldn't wait to see how much it'd fuck shit up. Kara, clearly surprised and worried, asked Jeong if he was alright. Inwardly, she wondered what masochist bullshit Jeong was on about. Our boy, however, told her he was alright. He cautioned her to focus, as Zepeckio was finally making his move. And true to his words, the charred fool was already on the move, charging straight at them. Jeong, unfazed, instructed Kara to wait for his signal. No matter what, she shouldn't attack until he told her to do so. Kara, obviously hesitant, struggled for a while but ultimately decided to trust in Jeong. Our boy, pleased by the baddie's trust, turned his attention back to Zepeckio. After their earlier clash, it became apparent that half-assed moves wouldn't work on it. If they truly wanted to take it down, then they'd have to do something big and flashy. As such, he resolutely baited the fiend to attack, luring it into the trap he had prepared. When Zepeckio crossed the crucial point, our boy, Sang Jung-woo, commanded his skeleton shadow to arise, summoning it to heed the call of the Shadow Monarch. Well, technically, it wasn't a shadow, and our boy wasn't a monarch. However, even a budget version of the Poppy Jinwoo was more than enough to clap hella cheeks. Thus, when Zepeckio lunged at them, poised to rip them apart, it got hit with the gotcha bitch no jutsu, yeeted firmly by the neck. Official debut, equipment skill. The skeleton soldier finally joined the fray. Big Daddy Jeong, delighted that his skill worked out, stared smugly at the trapped Zepeckio. He quickly realized that not only was the skeleton soldier OP, but he could also remotely control it. That is to say, he could sit back while his skelly chad fucked shit up, reaping the rewards while putting in zero effort. However, the skill also had a rather grave downside. That is, so long as the skeleton soldier was active, his left arm would be essentially useless. But that was something he'd worry about in the future. For now, his full focus was on Zepeckio. Speaking of the fiend, it was currently losing its shit, screaming at Jeong, calling him a demon in human skin. Well, considering a whole-ass skeleton manifested from his arm, I don't really blame him. Jeong, however, thought otherwise. He particularly held grudges and instructed Kara to blow his shit up. The gothic mommy, clearly itching for some action, immediately let it rip, activating her strongest skill. Channeling her Ghost Rider-type shit, she cast her Fire Devil at Zepeckio, blowing him up with demonic flames. Jeong, cautious of the attack, swiftly controlled the skelly Chad, leading it to avoid the brunt of the blow. Although it was needed to hold Zepeckio in place, it was also vulnerable to the flames, so a direct blow would be fatal to it as well. Not only that, as Jeong soon learned, his life force was tied to the skeleton, so any injuries it received would reflect on Jeong as well. Realizing this, he immediately leveled up his pain relief and lizard tail skills. Only then did his injuries settle. As for the skelly Chad, though they had a shared life force, it also had a self-healing factor, meaning it would regenerate its own injuries regardless of Jeong's input. Jeong, noticing this, marveled at the wondrous detail, though he immediately lamented its monstrous stamina consumption. Moving forward, he'd have to be cautious with the skill. Otherwise, he might find himself in quite a pickle. We switch back to Zepeckio, still bathing in the devil flames. The bastard, clearly on a whole new level of cockroach, surprisingly weathered through the attack, his life force still evidently intact. Enraged and in pain, it bellowed out a ghastly wail, threatening to kill the Chads this time. Kara, however, wasn't down for the cliché villain monologue. She immediately lit his ass up, forcing Zepeckio to stop his monologue and defend clumsily. The baddie, surprised that the fiend could still block, worriedly asked Jeong why the fucker wasn't dead yet. Our boy, equally confused, asked why she was asking him. It wasn't like he was the encyclopedia of L.A.G. Well, technically, he was. But even he was puzzled by Zepeckio, finding the beast an enigma. On one hand, he was hella weak, suffering their attacks pathetically, while on the other hand, he was tanking those attacks, suffering 0 fatal injuries despite the onslaught. It truly was a bizarre case. Zepeckio, frantic from the beatdown, howled at them, cursing them for turning their backs on him. As he'd expected, L.A.G wasn't a place trust could exist. It was a deceitful hell, filled with treacherous bastards. Saying so, he eliminated all restraint, lunging at the duo with murderous intent. Jeong, however, had something for his charred ass. He swiftly controlled the skelly Chad, leading it to tackle Zepeckio. Doubling down, he comboed the move with an electric blast, zapping the shit out of the fiend. Zepeckio, helpless against the onslaught, decided on a more desperate counter, opting for a mutually destructive approach. If the skelly Chad wouldn't let him go, then he'd drag the bastard with him to hell. Thinking so, he grabbed onto the skelly, jumping high into the air. Before Jeong could respond, he rammed into the ceiling, using the skeleton soldier as a buffer. Amidst the skelly's silent screams, Zepeckio didn't let up. Instead, he crashed into the left wall, then the right, doing his best to shake it off. When even that didn't work, Zepeckio said, "Fuck it," and unleashed an absolute crash fest on the cave walls, bashing the shit out of the skeleton. Jeong, watching all this, stared incredulously, wondering what the hell Zepeckio was cooking. Even though it was a dumb beast, surely it must know that destroying the skelly Chad wouldn't amount to much, right? Well, even if that was the case, it was better to be safe than sorry when dealing with shit and L.A.G. As such, he immediately dismissed his skeleton soldier, summoning back his arm bones. Surprisingly, when the bones returned, they set back in like a messed up jigsaw, needing no additional healing. And although this made no fucking sense, we can chalk it up to this being L.A.G. Nothing made sense to begin with. Our boy, now a retired budget Sung Jin-woo, stared cautiously at his arm, trying to assess any hidden drawbacks. When he realized there were none, he instantly shifted his focus back to Zepeckio, who, for some reason, was still thrashing the cave walls. Choosing to ignore him for now, he asked Kara if she had any big damage moves left. Kara replied that she indeed had something. However, for it to land, Zepeckio had to be restrained for a while. Jeong, hearing this, told her not to worry. If that's all she needed, then he'd deliver, even if he had to hold him down by his teeth. As he said this, a silhouette suddenly crashed beside him, catching him completely off guard. To his and Kara's surprise, the silhouette turned out to be Zepeckio, who'd moved at incredible speed, landing right between them. Capitalizing on their stunned shock, Zepeckio immediately made his move, charging straight for Kara. According to him, the one most deserving of death was this gothic wench, as without her, he wouldn't have been cooked so badly. Jeong, a fraction too late, watched helplessly as Zepeckio's arm tore through the air, aiming straight for Kara's heart. Cursing his shitty luck, he wondered if the bastard author wanted to kill off another of his baddies, forever trapping him in this maidenless hell. Well, fuck it. If that's how the author wanted to play it, then he had no choice but to revolt. If he had to secure his waifus on his own, then that's exactly what he'd do. Thinking so, he immediately reflected on what he could use to counter this threat. After mulling it over, he finally arrived at a feasible yet extremely dangerous solution. However, what choice did he have? If he didn't act now, Kara was as good as dead. Finding no other solution, Jeong resolutely activated his trump card, Door of Limitations. With the skill's activation, a crimson and savage aura burst out from Jeong, buffing his body several times over. Under the skill's effect, his eyes turned demonic, taking on a devilish hue. Jeong, noticing the bizarre changes to his body, immediately cancelled the bone blade, deeming it a wasted effort in this state. Not only was he strong enough to clap anything without it, but he was also losing hella stamina, making the bone blade a liability. With that done, he locked onto Zepeckio, targeting this loathsome fucker. Surprisingly, due to his buffed speed, the fiend was now moving hella slow, almost as if time had stopped around him. But Jeong knew this wasn't an issue of time. This was him moving so fast that everyone else seemed slow in his eyes. Capitalizing on this change, he zoomed towards Zepeckio, clocking the fool on the head. Before it could react, he comboed this blow with a knee strike, thrashing the shit out of the fiend. Not relenting, he proceeded to unleash a barrage of blows on the charred bastard, reducing the once formidable foe into a punching bag. Kara, watching all this, got moist seeing our boy go off like that. She'd known he was strong, but damn, was the chatty poppy always this strong? Back then, under Zepeckio's sneak attack, she'd already resigned herself to fate, believing there was nothing she could do to save her life. But who would have thought this chatty Jeong could come in clutch like that? Our boy, as if sensing the baddie's heart, kneed Zepeckio into the air, opening him up for a finisher move. Acting quickly, he swung at the fool, nailing him deep into the ground. Still not satisfied, he comboed the punch with an axe kick, driving his heel into Zepeckio's skull. With that, he casually backpedaled, eyeing to see what the fiend had left. Kara, noticing his withdrawal, asked what kind of skill that was, and if he had it, then why the hell didn't he use it earlier? Surely he hadn't been saving it for the cliché MC power-up trope, right? However, before she could probe further, the reason for Jeong's hesitation became apparent as he coughed up hella blood, soaking the ground in red. Noticing this, Jeong instantly deactivated the Door of Limitations skill, barely stabilizing his condition. After a bit of wheezing, he suddenly realized how close he'd been to death by recklessly activating that skill. Currently, the Door of Limitations was at level 4, which meant he could open 4 doors. However, just opening the first door caused him such a huge backlash that he was at death's door. If he had foolishly opened the 4th door from the get-go, then he would have died for sure. Thankfully, that didn't happen, and with his pain relief skill, he could somewhat endure the backlash of the deadly skill. But as they say, high risk, high reward. Although the skill was definitely dangerous, it was equally as OP. In fact, with that skill, Jeong was certain he'd whoop any ass, regardless of who they were. Kara, breaking our boy from his self-glazing, worriedly asked him if he was okay. Jeong, however, was clearly not okay. Because of the backlash, he couldn't even open his mouth, and his body was trembling all over. However, there were still moves to be made, so he forced himself to speak. With great difficulty, he managed to warn Kara, telling her to stop fucking around. Just because Zepeckio was beaten didn't mean he was dead. So before the bastard caught them lacking, she should go ahead and finish it off. Kara, snapping out of her daze, immediately locked in, instantly activating her ultimate skill. With a crackling of crimson embers, a majestic blade manifested, bathing the cave in its glow. This chatty flame was the Blade of Flames skill, a level 13 active skill exclusive to Kara. For now, it summoned a blade bathed in intense flames, promising to annihilate all it touched. Armed with the blade, Kara decisively slashed forward, launching the demonic weapon at Zepeckio. The strike landed with a deafening explosion, plumes of fire blossoming in the eerie cave. Our boy, unluckily caught up in the blast, was yeeted back like a ragdoll, skidding pathetically across the rough floor. If any of his baddies saw him in this state, he'd be sure to die a tragic virgin in this life. However, Jeong wasn't bothered by that. Despite the pathetic display, he was low-key glad he could rest up like that. Undoubtedly, the backlash from using the Door of Limitations skill was more than he expected, so any chance to recuperate was more than welcome. Back to Kara, Although she was closer to the blast site, she surprisingly didn't get yeeted back and thus maintained her chadlet aura. I don't know if it's because casters are immune to their skills' effects, or if the bastard author finally started showing some love to the female characters. In any case, the gothic mommy stared down at Zepeckio, eager to confirm her kill. After a bit of quiet waiting, she finally remembered our boy and worriedly asked if he was all right. Jeong, still sprawled on the floor like a wet dog, replied that he was okay. A little bit of blast couldn't do shit to him. Getting back up, he suddenly realized an ominous fact. Although Zepeckio seemed down for the count, the system still hadn't announced the completion of the mission. That is to say, shit was brewing behind the scenes, and he, the puppy Jeong, was destined to receive a whole lot of backshots from L.A.G. Kara, equally worried, asked Jeong if Zepeckio was finally dead. Jeong replied that he wasn't sure, but the method to check was simple. They'd just whoop the bastard until he confirmed whether he was alive or dead. In the meantime, he advised Kara to restore her stamina, and if she had potions to help speed that up, she was better off using them. With that said, Jeong downed a stamina potion and silently walked toward Zepeckio. As he did, he reflected on the room's mission. The system had instructed them to locate 2 imposters. The first was described as what looks like a human but is not a human, while the other was described as what pretends to be human. According to the system, killing the first imposter would enrage the second imposter. Zepeckio, with his bizarreness, was obviously one of the 2 imposters. However, even if that was the case, it still meant there was another hidden imposter out there somewhere, stalking him from the shadows. That was undoubtedly not an ideal situation to be in. The most dangerous cases were those where enemies lurked in the shadows while he was clueless in the light. But even if he worried about it, what would it change? The situation would still stay the same, so he might as well deal with what he could control. Thinking so, Jeong resolutely raised his bone blade, letting the ghostly katana stab at Zepeckio soon after. With a silent ding, the blade bounced off the fiend's skin, leaving only a small dent. Jeong, noticing this, frowned in annoyance. He didn't know what kind of material Zepeckio was made of, but it definitely featured an absurd, defensive quality. In fact, when he was thrashing it earlier in his limitation form, he'd gotten the feeling that he was punching wood. Gazing down at it, he wondered what the hell it might be. And with L.A.G being what it is, it could literally be anything. As he was still mulling it over, a hoarse voice called out, proclaiming itself to be a man. The duo, obviously shocked by this, immediately took their battle stances, ready for shit to pop off. Kara, clearly a curious Dora, asked Jeong yet another question. She wanted to know if Zepeckio had spoken just now. Damn, bitch. What's with the questions? Are you the mommy of questions or something? Jeong, obviously more gentle than I am, replied that he wasn't sure. Just when he wanted to speak some more, the hoarse voice returned, and this time they clearly traced it back to Zepeckio. The cockroach fiend, seemingly allergic to death, wailed out, saying that he was human. He shouted this again and again, venting his frustration that no one believed him. Our duo, with the fuck that no jutsu, immediately distanced themselves from Zepeckio, clearly wary of the tweaking fiend. To their shock, Zepeckio suddenly jetted into the air, crashing loudly into the roof. As the dust cloud settled, a bizarre scene materialized before the duo. Zepeckio, the weird fuck, was pinned to the roof, held in place by a thin pillar. As if that wasn't creepy enough, charred skin and flesh suddenly started to rain down, bathing the duo in a pungent scent. At this point, even a blind person could see that shit wasn't right, and it was undoubtedly time to get the fuck out of there. However, before the duo could move, Zepeckio started screaming again, shouting that it wasn't human. As it did so, the thin pillar holding it up gradually shrank, lowering it slowly to the ground. The duo, noticing this, racked their brains for a solution, wondering what L.A.G was cooking this time. However, the treacherous game didn't keep them in the dark for long. Soon, Zepeckio reached the ground, and its true nature was finally revealed. Most of you might have already guessed this since the name was a bit on the nose, pun intended. But yes, the true nature of Zepeckio was Pinocchio, the beloved and innocent wooden doll who deeply desired to be human. And in typical L.A.G fashion, the cursed game corrupted that idea, giving rise to this vile monstrosity, Zepeckio. Jeong, also realizing this, scowled visibly. He'd known L.A.G was cooking something, but he never thought this would be it. The cursed Pinocchio, however, wasn't going to give him time to settle his feelings. It slowly walked toward them, asking if they were human or nah. In a sickening twist, it grabbed hold of its long nose, brutally breaking it in half. The duo, witnessing this self-mutilation scene, responded in arguably the best way. Lit that bitch up. Who in their right mind would let such an enemy cook? In any case, they decided to feed Zepekiyo some fireballs first, and if he survived that, then they'd discuss it later. The fiend, however, said, "Hell nah, we're discussing it now." It easily tanked their attacks, suffering 0 damage. In an enraged tone, it asked them what they were doing. Humans shouldn't behave like that. They should discuss things with words first before resorting to violence. But for them, they immediately responded with violence, which could only mean one thing. They weren't human. Saying so, Zepekiyo suddenly burst into rage, expelling all the souls it had collected. With the souls no longer limiting its body, it quickly grew massive, reaching well over 3 meters. Now in its true form, it mad-dogged the duo, promising to kill them all. Jeong, eyeing the creepy fiend, couldn't help but have a sickening feeling in his gut. No matter how he thought about it, this wasn't going to be an easy fight. Zepekiyo, as if proving him right, suddenly started growing again, towering over the duo. It repeatedly promised to kill them, insisting that it wasn't lying. If it lied, then its nose would grow, and if it did, then it wouldn't become human. That is to say, Zepekiyo really meant that shit. He truly wanted to kill our Chad. Doubling down on its threat, it promised to dig their hearts out and eat them. Maybe then it would really become human. Jeong, seeing the situation spiraling way out of control, stepped forward to respond. He instructed Kara to prepare her strongest attack, something guaranteed to bring that bastard down. As for him, he'd act as the bait, buying enough time for her to attack. Kara, clearly skeptical, asked if he could truly do it. Their last exchange with Zepekiyo hadn't been that great after all. Jeong replied that it didn't matter whether he could do it or not. He'd get it done regardless. This was L.A.G. The choice to retreat was never given in this hell. Saying so, he resolutely walked forward before suddenly sprinting off, rapidly closing the gap between them. With the boost from his electric skill, Jeong was very confident in his speed, even daring to challenge the Flash in this state. However, again, this was L.A.G. There was always a bigger dog in this game. Before Jeong could react, Zepekiyo suddenly spawned beside him, inches away from his face. Our boy, scared shitless, immediately jumped back, narrowly avoiding a critical attack. Sweating bullets, he wondered how the hell the fiend had gotten so fast. In fact, if it wasn't for his CHADY reaction, he might as well have been cooked with that blow. However, even if he cursed about it, it still wouldn't change what he had to do. Zepekiyo had to die. Otherwise, he'd be the one dying there. Thinking so, Jeong resolutely locked in, eager to clap some wooden cheeks. Man plans, and God's laugh. As much as Jeong intended to clap Zepekiyo, the fiend had no intention of dying so easily. Instead, it took the initiative, bringing the fight straight to Jeong. In a downright insidious move, it bit at Jeong's pee-pee, forcing the latter to back away frantically. And although some might argue that all is fair in love and war, surely this had to have crossed some line, right? Jeong, clearly believing so, retaliated in kind. If Zepekiyo wanted a taste of his sword, then he'd be sure to give it a mouthful. The fiend, however, wasn't satisfied with just this. It immediately followed up with a grab attack, intending to trap our boy. Jeong, catching on to its scheme, quickly kicked off Zepekiyo's arms, using the force to retreat. Luckily, he did so just in time. When Zepekiyo's sneak attack finally came, the sheer might behind the blow sent out shockwaves, hinting at how monstrously disastrous it was. Now backpedaling, Jeong couldn't help but gulp at the absurd attack. If he'd faced it head-on, he would have been cooked, his strong bones be damned. However, Zepekiyo wasn't done. It charged at Jeong, arms opened for a spear tackle. Jeong, finding himself on the defensive, opted for a change of tactics. Since normal attacks were ineffective against Zepekiyo, he decided on a more concentrated assault, hoping to prevail through quality. Thinking so, he launched a condensed electric blast, aiming it at the fiend. Unfortunately, even this wasn't enough, as the fool easily bitch-slapped it away, continuing its charge toward Jeong. Our boy, truly at his wit's end, cursed inwardly at the monstrous display. If even his condensed attack couldn't do shit to Zepekiyo, then how the fuck did L.A.G expect them to deal with this fool? Enraged and aggrieved, he continued his clumsy retreat, doing his best to dodge the fiend's deadly attacks. As he did so, he thought back to Zepekiyo's earlier block. Why had the fiend gone out of its way to swat away his assault? If it was truly invincible, then it should have just tanked the hit. So why block? Did it mean its weakness was its eyes? Although it was just a guess on his part, Jeong took note of the idea, planning to use it later. In the meantime, he continued his tragic retreat, avoiding Zepeckio's strikes, which, for some reason, all seemed to be aimed at his dick. Finally fumbling, Jeong found himself at a dead end, trapped between a wall and the charging fiend. Seemingly helpless, he resolutely took his stance, eager to duke it out with the bastard. However, all this was a show. Jeong had deliberately lured Zepeckio into a trap, opening it up for a counterattack by Kara. The gothic mommy, clearly ready, immediately let it rip, launching 3 blazing swords at the fool. Caught off guard, Zepeckio ate the assault, disappearing in the fiery blossom. Our boy, also caught in the explosion, immediately charged out, barely avoiding a scorching demise. Now free, he regrouped with Kara, watching on as the woody bastard burned. I had initially thought that was the end of it, but this gothic bitch just had to jinx it, asking Jeong if Zepeckio was dead. And as expected, the fiend emerged from the flames, almost as if it had gotten a second wind from Kara's foolish words. Thanks a lot, bitch. Jeong, equally frustrated, stared gravely at the unscathed Zepeckio. Although he was fuming at Kara's foolishness, he still needed the baddie, so he had no choice but to swallow his rage. Turning to her, he asked if she'd be able to fire something even stronger if given the chance. Kara replied that she could, but considering her stamina, it would probably be the last assault she'd launch before collapsing. Not to mention she'd need a shitload of time to get it ready. Jeong told her not to worry. If it was time she needed, then it was time she'd get. Though he sounded confident, inwardly, he was sweating bullets. Forget his current pathetic state. Even if he was at his peak, he still wouldn't have been Zepeckio's match. The difference in their strength and speed was just that absurd. However, even if that was the case, it didn't mean he'd cower. He was Jeong motherfucking Hyeok. Like hell he'd fall to such a bastard. Thinking so, our boy resolutely activated his limitation skill, shrouding the cave in his demonic aura. So what if his body fell apart? So what if the backlash would be tragic? He'd be sure to send Zepeckio to hell before that happened. Kara, visibly worried, asked Jeong if he'd be okay. His body was still recovering after all. Jeong reassured her, letting her know he'd endure it somehow. And besides, since her jinxing ass had led them to this situation, it wasn't like they could just ignore it, right? He instructed her to focus on her role and not mind him. This was L.A.G. Such sacrifices were necessary in that hell. Kara reluctantly agreed, beginning the channeling of the pièce de résistance, the strike that would hopefully bring down the woody bastard. As for Jeong, he made a beeline for Zepeckio, planning to buy her as much time as he could. With grim determination, he resolved to maintain his limitation skill, not stopping until he brought Zepeckio down. Failure was not an option, especially since he'd seen how much Zepeckio loved biting off dicks. Such a bastard could not be allowed to win. Zepeckio, as if sensing his diss, also dove in, tangling Jeong in a brutal melee. It first launched a slap attack, kicking up a dust cloud from the force. Jeong, immediately on the defensive, clumsily dodged the slap, sliding between its legs to escape. Now free, he immediately turned back, driving a killer knee to Zepeckio's face. The fiend countered with a swipe attack, but Jeong was faster, barely dodging the vicious assault. Leveraging his momentum, he performed a mid-air somersault, perching gracefully on the roof. He immediately jumped back in, bringing the fight to Zepeckio. The fiend, also rising to the challenge, responded with a finger stab, seeking to pierce him through. Jeong, however, easily dodged the stab, countering with a heavy punch that smashed Zepeckio into the ground. The fiend, still unfazed, immediately recovered, ready for round 2. Jeong, equally ready, sprang forward, clocking the fool on the jaw. He comboed this move with a Superman punch, driving his fist into Zepeckio's ribs. Although he was holding up for now, Jeong knew this couldn't last long. His body was slowly breaking apart, and it wouldn't be long until he collapsed. Even still, he resolutely dove back in, determined to endure until the end. Zepeckio, completely livid from being toyed with, lunged at Jeong, stealthily preparing its finisher, a spear tackle. Our boy, noticing this, also prepared his finisher move, dual skill activation. Even though his body was in shambles, he still risked it and activated his electric skill, coating his body in a volt storm. With a double skill buff, Jeong shot forward, leaving a tempest surge in his wake. Zepeckio responded with a claw attack, leveraging its momentum to boost the assault. Our boy, having expected this, narrowly avoided the claw, countering with a savage punch to the gut. Because of the massive momentum, Jeong's punch kicked up a shock storm, forcing Zepeckio's body to cave inward. However, he too suffered gravely as his arm tore open, stabbed through by his shattered bones. But Jeong ignored this pain, using more force to send Zepeckio flying. As the hateful fucker skidded away, he used the short respite to assess his condition. One casual glance was enough to tell how pathetic his condition was. His hand was broken, bones shattered, and even his body was slowly falling apart. It was truly a miracle he was still standing. However, the silver lining was that he'd finally confirmed Zepeckio's weakness. Just as he'd guessed, the fucker's weakness was its eye. Armed with this info, Jeong decisively pressed the attack, resolute not to give Zepeckio any respite. Though his body was breaking down, there was still enough in the tank to give a big fuck you to Zepeckio. Our boy, channeling all his Sigma, Poppy, and Big Daddy aura, glided through the air, using his electro to air walk. Leveraging this panty-dropping feat, he instantly appeared before the fallen Zepeckio, cocking his hand back for a brutal jab. Before the fool could react, Jeong fed it a knuckle sandwich, making sure to bury its loathsome face into the ground. Zepeckio, left reeling from the blow, endured the pain and responded with a quick cross to Jeong's chest, making a mess of his ribcage. Overwhelmed by the force, Jeong was sent flying, crashing pathetically against the cave wall. This casual punch from Zepeckio finally broke the delicate balance in Jeong's body, and all his suppressed injuries came flooding in. Because of this awful timing, Jeong instantly became a spent force, a fish on the chopping board, helpless to defend against his demise. Zepeckio, enraged and equally spent, shakily stood up, its full fury locked on Jeong. Deep resentment bled through its lips, and it couldn't help but curse our boy, threatening to kill him in the worst ways possible. He'd do everything to make him suffer, even if he had to poke him in the ass and lie like crazy. Pause. Clearly too impatient to wait, it instantly lunged forward, curving a beeline toward our boy. Jeong, truly at his wit's end, watched helplessly as the fiend charged at him, powerless to stop it. Because of the backlash, his whole body was numb, and he couldn't rise an inch, even if the hawk was toed. This was it. This was as far as he could go. Though he felt resigned, there just wasn't anything he could do. He was sure to die this time. Just as he was preparing himself for Garcia's warm embrace, Kara called out, yelling hell no to his sweet harem in heaven. She chucked a blazing fireball at him, blowing the shit out of our boy. Zepeckio, left stunned by the attack, shifted its focus to Kara, curious to know what the hell was going on. When it did, it couldn't help but tremble slightly, coming face to face with a blazing fire sword. With no chance to react, the sword stabbed its flank, sinking deep into its woody body. Amidst a bright explosion, the inferno blade rampaged through Zepeckio's body, blowing up his right leg. It then tore apart its left flank, before doing the same to his right arm. Finally, it made a mess of his face, barely missing that natural dildo on its nose. However, despite all this, the fiendish bastard still refused to die, stubbornly staying on its feet. Jeong, noticing this, couldn't help but curse the bastard. Even with all that, it still refused to die? Keep in mind that Kara's attack was more insidious than it seemed. It was designed to infiltrate the body, rampage about, and consume the victim from the inside out. So for this bastard to still be alive, it could only be chalked up to this being L.A.G. Zepeckio, now mangled and completely enraged, cursed at the duo, showing particular hostility toward Kara. It was because of this wench that he was in that state, a fact he could never forgive. But as much as he wanted to skin her alive, he too knew the bigger threat was the big Poppy Jeong, so it swallowed its hate and staggered toward him. With clear malice in its eyes, it promised to tear our boy apart, and if possible, it would shit on his grave. Jeong, peeping the obvious danger he was in, decided to gamble one last time. Even though his body was falling apart, the same was true for Zepeckio, so if he could just hold out, he might just be able to survive this hell. Thinking to this point, he ruthlessly zapped himself, using the currents to forcibly stimulate his dying body. Fighting through the clear anguish, he shakily faced off against Zepeckio, betting it all on that final brawl. Zepeckio, also of the same mind, rose up to the challenge, doing its best to suppress its burning body. With both titans locked in, they both pounced forward, engaging in possibly the last melee of their lives. Thunder and dust bloomed from the attack, and Jeong couldn't help but cough up a mouthful of blood. Just when it seemed over for our boy, he suddenly got a second wind, which he used to punch the shit out of Zepeckio. Through CHADY glory, Jeong bashed apart the smug face, finally putting an end to the loathsome fucker. The system, as if sharing in the excitement, immediately announced the clear status, stating that the first mission had been accomplished. As a reward, 30 souls and a random passive skill would be given to the players. For our dying boy, the system gave him the Fiery Man passive skill. The skill was kinda trash, only heating his body up in proportion to his physical ability. Jeong, also noticing this ass reward, completely ignored it, instead focusing on his close shave with death. He had really cut it close that time. If Zepeckio had held on for just a second longer, he might have been the one to die. The system, seemingly aware of its garbage reward, sounded with another notification, this time bringing great news as a consolation. It stated that the second mission, Kill the Second Imposter, had also been completed. Thus, additional rewards would be given to Jeong. For those who are confused, it basically means Lag fooled us all. And Zepeckio was both the first and second imposter. And if that still doesn't make sense, just say fuck Lag and let it go. What else can we do? Moving on to the additional rewards, just as the system had promised, Jeong received a rune. This was Zepeckio's Rune of Anger. It allowed the wielder to activate the skill Madness, and further buffed their physical strength by 5%. As for the Madness skill, it did exactly what it sounded like. Once activated, the user would enter a berserk state for 1 minute, with possibly the normal buffs berserkers had. Our boy, mulling over the rewards, noted that they were kinda trash this time. Not only was the first passive ass, but the second was equally troublesome. Madness was a skill he didn't want to use and hoped he never had to use in the future. But from what we know about Lag, this motherfucker is gonna use that skill almost immediately. Gothic Kara, pulling up to our boy, asked him if he was okay. Jeong replied that he was alright, even though one of his injuries was caused by her personally. Kara, a bit embarrassed, said that it was the only way. If she hadn't blown him away from Zepeckio, then her signature technique would have hit him too, and he would have died pathetically. Not only that, she had to do that to confuse some of the Chads who thought she was the second imposter. Jeong, flashing a rare smile, told her not to worry about it. Her judgment was spot on. Not only had she saved him, but she also gave Not a rare chance to laugh at the Chads and Chadlets in the comments. Serves them right for suspecting our new mommy. Kara, obviously confused by the fourth wall breaking, asked Jeong what they'd do next. Should they move forward? Jeong replied, telling her to chill out. There wasn't a need to rush. They would first rest up and recuperate. Only then would they move out. However, in typical Lag fashion, just when they thought things were simmering down, shit suddenly hit the fan, and the whole cave started shaking. The duo, obviously taken aback, wondered what the hell Lag was cooking this time. With eerie, foreboding looks, they turned in the direction of the incoming chaos. To their shock, a flood of doom swept their way, turning their already perilous situation even worse. Jeong, always quick with his reflexes, grabbed hold of Kara, making a quick getaway into the connecting corridor. However, how could a measly mortal escape the mechanisms of nature? The flood instantly caught up, sweeping our boy and his new baddie away. Our boy, cursing the author profusely, wondered what the hell he was up to. Damn it, after killing his last boo, did he want to drown this one as well? The author, as if saying fuck yeah, influenced the scene, forcing our chaste MC into a dark hole. If he wasn't careful, this would be the only hole he'd ever enter in his entire life. Jeong, obviously indignant, fought hard, trying his best to escape such a fate. Yet despite his efforts, he was just a man. How could he compete against nature? He instantly lost the fight, getting sucked into the dark vortex. After a bit of pointless drifting, a portal finally appeared, spewing out the duo like worthless trash. As for where they ended up, the system announced it as the next floor, Room B611. As the duo lay sprawled on the floor like wet pigs, a shadowy silhouette stealthily approached them, exclaiming in surprise upon seeing them. Jeong, equally surprised, gazed at the hidden silhouette, marveling at the wonders of fate for regrouping like that. Predictably, the shadowy silhouette was none other than Dwayne, who had somehow survived and bagged himself a baddie. And it wasn't just any baddie. It was the one and only Mommy Maytal, Jeong's old boo from his past regression. Our boy, shocked beyond belief, ogled at the bad one, vague memories flashing through his mind. How could he forget that delicate and gentle bod, one further amplified by its loyal soul? This was indeed his Mommy Maytal, the very same from his last life. But why was she there? Was she also trapped in the regression like him? Such thoughts traced through Jeong's mind, causing him to blank out for a second. He wordlessly stared at the baddie, seeing a version only he could. Dwayne, completely oblivious to Jeong's struggle, rambled on like an idiot, expressing his disbelief at meeting him there. Jeong, however, completely ignored him, his full focus on Maytal. And I gotta say, I sorta get it. That thang be thanging. After a bit of creepy stalking, Jeong finally realized that the Maytal before him was different. Not only was her public attribute different, but she also didn't seem to recognize him. Almost as if her shell was intact, yet her soul was different. Realizing this, Jeong reluctantly peeled his eyes off the baddie, trying his best to calm his chaotic mind. Dwayne, offering a bit of backstory, let the duo know that he'd met the maiden in the last room, B532. He assured them that she was good people, so they need not worry. Shifting his focus to Kara, he curiously inquired about her origins. Kara, dodging the question, asked Jeong if this was the friend he'd mentioned before. Upon Jeong's confirmation, she couldn't help but glaze Dwayne, saying that he looked reliable as fuck. Maytal joined the banter, silently pointing at Jeong's injuries. She then gestured toward the healing room, hinting that he should get some treatment. Kara, marveled by the gentle maiden, praised her for being kind and gentle, to which Maytal flashed a beaming smile, melting the ice from my frozen heart. Dwayne, clearly wiser from experience, linked Jeong's grave injuries to the difficulty of the room. If even the big dog could get that injured, then the room must have been hell. Jeong confirmed this, adding that he'd survived purely by plot armor. If things had dragged on, even that wouldn't have saved him. Returning the question, he asked Dwayne how his challenge was. Dwayne replied that things were tough, but he had the maiden Maytal there to help, so they somehow made it through. Kara, feeling her relevance dwindling, joined the banter, exaggerating her impact in the room. She glazed that without her, Jeong would have been cooked, powerless to defeat Zepeckio. And although this might sound like a flex, if you really thought about it, she was low-key right. Jeong also agreed with this, hence he stayed quiet. Instead, he enjoyed Kara's goofy side, finding the sharp contrast to her Valkyrie side intriguing. With the banter done, the duo split up. Jeong headed for treatment while Kara visited the vendor. Once inside, Jeong immediately made use of the facility, instructing the system to heal all his wounds. A couple of minutes later, and 11 souls down, our boy's injuries were fully healed, and he promptly returned to the hall. When he did, a pleasant surprise was waiting for him there. Turns out, Kara had decided to go all out in the thirst trap, buffing her drip with sexiness galore. In fact, the change was so drastic that even our virgin Chad couldn't help but salivate a little. Oh, Jeong, you naughty dog. Reining in his pervy thoughts, Jeong seriously evaluated her drip. From the looks of it, the baddie had invested quite a bit into that change, so the value should be equivalent. If that was the case, then he had nothing to worry about. A side note was that she was now proper eye candy, which made the investment even more worth it. Done with his cultured thoughts, Jeong entered the vendor room. What greeted him was a humongous vendor Chad, one easily taller than 5 meters. For Jeong, this sight wasn't intimidating. Rather, he was low-key delighted. The taller the vendor, the more goods it sold, so this was a welcomed development by our boy. Acting quickly, he immediately cashed in his skill and equipment coins, exchanging them for relevant items. For the skill, the vendor gave him the Batman skill, which, contrary to its cool name, was actually pure booty. The equipment, however, was decent. He received the Demon's leather jacket, a slick poppy jacket with hidden functions to boot. The first was a pocket space of sorts where he could keep his loot. The second was an incredible buff to his agility, provided he was in the dark. Done with that, he immediately shifted his focus to the items on sale. After a bit of thinking, he decided to purchase 2 equipment enhancers and a socket for his Skull General's mask. With the 3 in tow, he immediately set about improving his gear. First, he equipped Zepeckio's Rune of Anger to the mask. Then, he used the first enhancer to attempt an upgrade. Unfortunately, this attempt failed, and the enhancer was wasted. Not discouraged, Jeong tried out the next enhancer, and luckily, this time the upgrade worked. The equipment successfully leveled up to Skeleton King's face from Skeleton General's jaw. With the upgrade, the main skill, Summon Skeleton Soldiers, increased from level 1 to level M, Master. Predictably, Jeong was overjoyed by this. He hadn't held out much hope for the upgrade, so for it to rise by that much was truly a cause for celebration. The true Chads, however, know this isn't the case. Since L.A.G is never generous, we can already predict a shit show for our boy in the future. One way or another, he's gonna have to pay for that luck, even if he has to toot that ass. Jeong, clearly oblivious to this, tested out his new mask. Surprisingly, it got absorbed into his skin, disappearing completely from view. Though stunned, he quickly adapted, leaving the vendor's room soon after. Back in the hall, the new squad geared up, ready to face the new hell. And in case you hadn't noticed, the old flames were outfit matching. Probably the author's attempt at being slick. Our boy, still down bad, gazed intensely at Maytal, wondering if she truly didn't recognize him. As he channeled his inner ditty, Dwayne caught him staring and immediately taunted. He teased Jeong for being thirsty, saying that his eyes would pop out at that rate. But he didn't blame him though, since Maytal was indeed foxy. Jeong, sensing the tease in Dwayne's tone, told him to stop spewing bullshit. It wasn't what he thought. Locking back in, he shifted the conversation to the next room. Upon the shift, Dwayne suddenly turned solemn. He confessed his doubts to Jeong, expressing his lack of confidence in the next challenge. Jeong, equally worried, sighed helplessly. It wasn't like they could do anything about it. This was L.A.G. Their only choice was to either go forward or die. Although the odds were stacked against them, they could only give it their all and hopefully make it out alive. With that, the squad resolutely entered the next hell, ready for whatever shit show might follow. We cut to the squad's CHADY entrance into the next room. Our boy, obviously the leader, was first into the fray, his new drip on full display. And I don't know if it's just me, but without the mask, Jeong went from a badass killer MC to a dolled-up femboy. Not sure if he'll fight or rizz up the baddies. In any case, the squad weren't the only ones in the room. There were two more teams with them. The first was led by this Afro dandy and a budget Saitama. Well, more like Saitama's older, uglier brother, the one who couldn't pull no bitches. And the next was a group of three, their leader a familiar face from Jeong's past life, the Poppy Stepan. Upon the team's entry, L.A.G officially announced the room's mission. And as expected of this sadistic hell, the mission involved a massacre. Specifically, the teams were to kill each other until less than half of their original numbers remained. As for who they'd kill, L.A.G didn't care about that, so long as it got to see blood. To motivate them further, the system promised to triple their souls if they killed and reaped the other players. A tempting offer, to say the least. With the mission drop, the players acted as you'd expect. Stepan's team sighed bitterly at the brutality of L.A.G, but at the end of the day, they expected nothing less from the cursed game. In contrast, the other team took everything in stride, quickly getting over the mission and instead taunting Stepan for being blind, deeming him an easy target. This was the difference between the players. Some struggled to accept their new reality, while others, like fish in water, easily adapted, making use of their new circumstances. Our boy was a little bit of both, but currently, his full focus was locked onto Stepan. As you'd imagine, Jeong was losing his shit. Running into an old acquaintance was already a miracle, but for another one to pop up immediately after? At that? This couldn't be chalked up to simple coincidence. L.A.G was definitely cooking something. However, even if that was the case, it didn't change the situation he was in, so Jeong decided to lock in and worry about it later. Dwayne, surprisingly more cold-blooded, calmly asked Jeong if all they needed to do was kill a bunch of people. Jeong confirmed this, explaining that they had to kill 5 to meet the system's requirements. As the two conversed, a Theo Von-looking motherfucker stepped forward from Stepan's group, ready to drop some talk no jutsu. However, before he could spout his "we're all friends" bullshit, he quickly learned that this wasn't Naruto. It was L.A.G, and such worthless sentiments weren't allowed in this hell. With a blade through his gut, Theo Von collapsed, becoming the first casualty in the room. As for the perpetrator, Eunice Kunbo, the Afro dandy from earlier. The treacherous fellow had used his shadow ability to launch a sneak attack, something that caught everyone off guard, including Jeong. With a worried look on his face, Jeong feared for Stepan's safety, as any sensible person would know he was the next target. True to his deduction, Eunice turned his blade to Stepan, charging forward to stab him through. You'd think with his blindness, he'd be the weakest in the room, but that would be your naivety talking. He easily dodged the stab attack and countered with a gut punch, sending the fool flying. Before Afro Dandy could process what the hell just happened, a stamp kick kissed his face, putting an end to his worthless life. Just like that, the Poppy Stepan showcased his dominance, proving to all why he'd been Jeong's general in his last life. Calmly retreating, he asked his companion if Theo was dead. The bronze mommy replied that he wasn't, though that wouldn't be the case for long. Stepan, upon hearing this, told her to kill Theo. It was better if she was the one to claim the benefits. All this was witnessed by Jeong from the sidelines, and he couldn't help but reevaluate Stepan. Don't let his STEM-boy face fool you. Jeong was currently on high alert. He deemed Stepan to be the biggest obstacle in the room, made worse by the fact that he couldn't fight all out against him in lieu of their past relationship. But as much as that was the case, Jeong found himself hesitating. The ruthlessness and savagery of this Stepan was unlike his past regression, where the Chad had been mostly passive. So was it truly wise to treat him the same and possibly endanger himself by holding back? As he pondered this conundrum, the third group approached them, seeking to form a temporary alliance. They argued that Stepan was hella strong, and only through their combined strength could they bring him down. Jeong, eyeing the oblivious bastards, pointed out the flaw in their request. Their team had 3 people, while Jeong's had 4. So even if they killed Stepan's group, they'd still be 1 extra on the mission's quota. The group replied that they'd worry about that later. For now, they'd kill Stepan's group and get revenge for Afro Dandy. Jeong countered their suggestion, stating that Stepan hadn't shown hostility toward them, so why would they fight him? To this, the new leader pointed towards Stepan, claiming that he was already attacking. Jeong, obviously taken aback, acted instinctively, shifting his focus to Stepan. The moment he did, he immediately realized it was a trap. The other team had tricked him into shifting his focus, hoping to launch a sneak attack. However, their treacherous plot was destined to fail, as Jeong wasn't the only Chad in his squad. The 2 mommies instantly made their moves, burning and burying the treacherous fools. As for their leader, he got a vicious stab to the gut, a little gift from our boy Jeong. In a mocking tone, he congratulated him on his sick ploy. Too bad he chose the wrong opponent. He let the bastard know that his gang was a tough bunch. Like hell they'd fall for such a cheap trick. As he said this, we got a glimpse of the baddies absolutely decimating the competition, finding 0 challenge in the endeavor. Jeong, always the Chad, finished the confrontation flashily, cleanly decapitating the fool. With the bastards done, they reaped their rewards, leisurely enjoying the triple drop rate promised by the system. Done with that, the squad stared at each other, puzzled. According to the mission details, the room should have been considered cleared once the total number of players dropped to 6. Obviously, they'd already fulfilled that requirement, so what the hell was going on? Just when Jeong was beginning to think L.A.G was fucking with them, a deep sigh suddenly sounded in the room, and a mysterious male slowly materialized. Turns out this stalking perv had been using his dual skills to stay hidden from the group, possibly plotting a sneak attack. As for who he was, the system introduced him as Tony Shaw, a weaselly coward who had somehow managed to turn one of the worst attributes into a killer move. He had paired his trash attribute with the invisible skill, creating a dual ability that essentially made him vanish for 5 minutes. And although that doesn't sound like much, give that power to a down bad Chad, and suddenly the whole world suffers greatly. Seeing the new addition to the room, the 2 squads collectively turned in his direction, causing Tony to feel an immense sense of danger. He had hoped to stalk in the shadows and reap easy benefits, but who would have thought his situation would deteriorate so quickly? Jeong, eyeing the fool, mocked him silently. In a situation where someone had to die, it was obvious who both parties would target. Tony had tried to be slick, but it ended up biting him in the ass. Tony, also aware of this, tried to appeal to the squads, hinting that it was unfair for them to gang up on him. The bronze mommy wasn't having it. She told him to cut the bullshit. This was L.A.G. Since when was anything ever fair? As things stood, it was pure logic to kill a stranger, aka Tony, rather than target someone they'd known for way longer. Tony, finally realizing how fucked he was, cursed his shitty luck, and cursed Afro Dandy even more. It was because of that bastard dying so quickly that he had found himself in this shitty situation. If he ended up dying because of that fool, he promised to follow him to hell and whoop his black ass. Maytal, seeing the squad still not moving, manipulated her sand to pass them a message. Dwayne, who had known her longer, explained that this was her way of communicating. She would write letters in the sand and use them to relay her thoughts. For now, her message to the squad was simple. Team up with Stepan and kill Tony. Afterward, when Stepan and the bronze baddie had their guards lowered, they would ambush them and take them out too. Although her words made sense in the fucked up logic of L.A.G, Jeong couldn't help but feel a bitter taste in his mouth. The Maytal of his past life would never have suggested such a thing. In fact, She was the kind of person who would have sacrificed her life if it meant stopping the squads from fighting. Evidently, the Metal before him was different from the one he had known before his regression. And the same was true for Stepan. Though it pained him to admit it, Jeong had no choice but to accept that the two were entirely different people. Back to the discussion at hand. Kara was the first to reject the idea, explaining that risking their lives to fight Stepan and the bronze baddie wasn't worth it. Dwayne supported her, saying that instead of fighting, they should use the opportunity to befriend the duo. Maybe, if things worked out, they might get new travel buddies. Maytal, however, was resolute. She insisted that attacking was the best strategy. Besides, what guarantee did they have that the duo would reciprocate their kind intentions and not attack them? Jeong, having heard enough of the argument, told all of them to cut it out. Whatever they do could be discussed later. For now, they should pay attention to the duo, since it seemed they were finally making their move. True to his words, Stepan and Bronzy were closing in on Tony, their killing intent obvious. The stealthy stalker, realizing his dire predicament, decided to counterattack, vowing to drag many down with him. With that, he lunged forward, activating his invisibility skill in the process. Predictably, Tony's disappearance caused the duo to pause. They instantly went on high alert, guarding against his inevitable sneak attack. Over on our CHAD side, the squad was still laid back, believing that Tony wouldn't attack them since they had superior numbers. Only an idiot would target 4 when he could target 2 instead. Jeong, however, disagreed. His countless years of experience in L.A.G made him understand that humans were unpredictable. If there was ever a place where someone could make such an idiotic decision, it was definitely in L.A.G. Thus, he told the squad to lock in and not give the enemy a flaw to exploit. With those words, he activated his Batman skill, using his enhanced hearing to track Tony down. After a bit of searching, he finally located the stealthy fucker. Turns out, the reason no one could hear him even though he was clearly moving was because he was using a technique to airwalk. Apparently, in L.A.G, the OP ability to airwalk was as cheap as cabbages, since even one-chapter characters like Tony could easily do it. Speaking of the creepy bastard, his target was ultimately picked, and it was none other than our boy Dwayne. Jeong, realizing this, shouted at him to be careful, warning him that Tony was right above him. Dwayne, who for some reason had been hella chill since this mission started, finally locked in, turning to counter the attacking Tony. However, the bastard was still in stealth mode, so his monstrous strength had no direct target to attack. Tony, noticing the puzzled look on Dwayne's face, charged forward even more fiercely, believing the giant unit was already in his grasp. Unfortunately, the fool made the same mistake all L.A.G villains continuously made, thinking that this was a mano-a-mano fight. Nah, bitch, this wasn't an honorable duel, this was a jump fest, and everyone could join. Maytal embodied this principle and sent out waves of sand, trapping the fool inside. Because of the dense cluster, Tony's invisibility was cancelled, and his stunned face was visible to all. Acting quickly, the sandy mommy deployed her giant's hand, grabbing hold of and squeezing the shit out of the fool. Tony, clearly hesitant to die, unleashed his trump card, Breath of the Giant. This was a skill that expanded the capacity of the holder's lungs to giant size and enabled them to exhale it as a form of attack. Though not particularly impressive, when used correctly, it had the potential to fuck mega shit up. And unluckily, our squad was the unwilling exemplar of this. They instantly got yeeted away, powerless against the overwhelming wind currents. Our boy and Dwayne were the only exceptions, though even they found the resistance daunting. Fed up with the one-sided barrage, Dwayne activated his power of a beast skill, braving through the pressure as he closed in on Tony. With a mighty leap, the unit drop-kicked the shit out of Tony, sending the coughing fucker off into the distance. In that single move, the fool crashed pathetically against the concrete wall, losing his worthless life soon after. Our boy, done with his CHADY deed, casually pocketed the soul, all while listening to the system's notifications. It stated that the unit Dwayne had joined the ranks of the players who'd accomplished the side mission. Kill and reap a player. As such, the relevant reward would be awarded to him as well. As for the main mission, the system announced it as completed since the total number of surviving participants had finally met the required quota. In light of this, the system announced that they would all be awarded, including Bronze Mommy, who turned out to be Priyanka, not Jonas, Chopra. Done with the rewards, L.A.G gave them permission to head to the next room, room B612, and because it was feeling generous, it promised to keep the triple drop rate active until they cleared that room. For those who'd forgotten, L.A.G promised to triple their souls if they killed and reaped the souls of other players. Think of it as an insidious incentive for them to murder each other and further bathe L.A.G in blood. Jeong, mulling over the rewards, channeled his big brain to do the quick math. With the triple drop rate, it meant their initial 50 souls reward would instantly become 150, making now a perfect opportunity to gather some souls. However, precisely because of that, he couldn't let his guard down. If he could think about it and be tempted, then so could the others. And as if on cue, Dwayne warned him of the approaching duo. It seemed like shit was finally about to get active. Thinking fast, Jeong warned the duo to stop, hinting that disregard would be met with fierce hostility. Stepan, taking a step back, replied that he had no intentions of fighting. Instead, he was more interested in an alliance. Noticing the sullen faces of the group, Stepan told them to chill out. He really had no ill intentions. Kara, picking up on this odd comment, asked Stepan how he could see their expressions when he was clearly blind. Stepan replied that it was his personal secret. How could he endanger himself by foolishly blabbering it to everyone? However, since he was the one who proposed an alliance, he might as well reveal it to earn their trust. He shared that as a consolation for losing his sight, he developed superhuman senses to compensate for his vision. So, inasmuch as he couldn't see in the technical sense, he could still perceive the world just like everyone else. Jeong, taking back the initiative, told him to be direct. What was it that he needed from them? Stepan replied that he wanted a temporary alliance. They would support each other until they cleared the next room. Maytal, seemingly having something to say, used her sand skill again, raising up a tablet to write on. However, as expected, Stepan was blind, so apart from the rustling sounds, he couldn't make out what she wanted to say. Priyanka did the translation, letting him know that Maytal had warned them to step back. Otherwise, they'd both be killed. Upon hearing the obvious threat, Stepan chuckled, replying that Maytal was hella harsh to the elderly. Jeong, still eyeing the duo suspiciously, finally noticed a bizarre point. At some time during the talk, Priyanka had stealthily performed a strange gesture, almost as if she was praying. But Jeong knew this wasn't a simple prayer pose. The bronze bitch was definitely up to something. Unfortunately, he caught on too late, as whatever trap the duo had set was already complete. Priyanka signaled for Stepan to act, and the old Chad didn't hesitate to let it rip. His eyes instantly turned demonic, burning with clear white flames. Jeong, noticing this, couldn't help but get a shiver down his spine. His danger sense was also flaring, warning him of the tremendous peril he was in. With no time to delay, he immediately shouted at the squad, warning them to brace for impact. Following the bellowed voice, crimson arms shot at them, barely avoiding stabbing them through. With their targets lost, the arms reluctantly retreated, settling behind Priyanka. This godly display was the active skill Arms of the Asura, a skill that allowed the holder to manifest 4 arms of the demon Asura. A highly OP skill, since once manifested, the arms would become one with the body, allowing for both offense and defense. However, despite the obviously domineering display, the squad didn't lose their fighting spirit. Instead, their battle lust was triggered, and they all charged at the duo. Kara and Maytal targeted Priyanka, while Jeong and Dwayne aimed for Stepan. The two mommies, with seamless coordination, launched fireballs and sand bullets at Priyanka, forcing the latter to defend. Meanwhile, Jeong and Dwayne faced off against Stepan, with Jeong going all out from the start. He activated his bone blade and instructed Dwayne to fall back, hinting that he'd create an opening for him. Dwayne, already familiar with Jeong's technique, readily agreed, lurking stealthily in the shadows, preparing for a decisive attack. Stepan, noticing their secret exchange, told them to take their time. He was confident he could clap them all the same. With that, the duo charged, and the old Chad waited, eager for an interesting battle. As he ran, Jeong cursed the dire development. If he could help it, he didn't want to fight Stepan. But as things stood, L.A.G really left him no way out. Since that was the case, he might as well go with the flow. Hopefully, there would be a way to remedy the situation in the end. Calming his thoughts, Jeong swung at Stepan, aiming for a decapitating slash. However, the old Chad easily blocked it, catching Jeong completely off guard. Before our boy could react, Stepan countered with a killer cross, aiming for Jeong's flank. Jeong, one with battle, instinctively protected his sides, barely blocking the brutal punch. Yet even with the block, the force still sent our boy flying, forcing him to skid off into the distance. Dwayne, capitalizing on the opening, spawned in with a jump punch, effectively completing the pincer attack. However, the old dude was ready for him and nimbly responded with a power punch, engaging Dwayne in a battle of strength. Contrary to Jeong's expectations, the duo was equally matched in strength, causing both of them to get knocked back. He had hoped Dwayne, the god of strength, would send Stepan flying, but it seemed that was only his wishful thinking. Dwayne was equally surprised. He, more than anyone, knew the limits of his CHADY strength, so for Stepan to match him so seamlessly, that was indeed a cause for alarm. Over at the maiden's side, the duo was still battling Priyanka, with Maytal taking the lead. Kara was relegated to the ambush position, tasked with closing the distance and launching decisive attacks on the foe. Acting on her role, the Gothic mommy launched a fire sword, shooting it straight for Priyanka's head. The Asura baddie, still tied up with Maytal, had to forcibly retreat. Only then did she block the attack. Furious about the ambush, she shot Kara a death stare, openly exposing her killing intent. The Gothic mommy ignored her, instead focusing on something more dire. Priyanka's Asura form had 4 arms, but currently, only 3 were used to block her attack. So where was the 4th? As she pondered this, a grim realization dawned on her, and she immediately turned to Maytal. Just as she'd expected, the 4th arm had launched an ambush, and the target was Maytal. Before her warning could register, the old flame was grabbed by the arm and yeeted into the air like a headless chicken. Jeong, completely oblivious to his booze predicament, closed in on Stepan, trying his luck with the L.A.G famous backstabbing. Unfortunately, the game was like, "Nah, bitch, you're the MC, you gotta fight fair and square." Stepan easily ducked below his slash, immediately putting an end to his backstabbing career. As if to teach him a lesson, the Chad countered with a back kick, yeeting the absolute shit out of our boy. Dwayne, joining the fray, jumped in with a gut punch, further buffing his strength with an active skill. But even with this, the old monster still blocked, using nothing but his bare hand to stop the attack. To the bewildered Dwayne, Stepan responded with a left jab, launching him into the air. I don't know about you guys, but to me, it seems like our Chads are really losing this fight. Jeong, equally aware of this, took a beat to analyze the foe. Not only was the bastard strong, but he also had supernatural senses and an absurd battle instinct. Continuing to battle him in his area of proficiency would only put them at a greater disadvantage. As he was still thinking of a solution to remedy their ass-whooping, a nervous voice called out, shouting Maytal's name. Our boy, drawn to the commotion, watched in horror as his flame was caught, seconds away from being squashed like a bug. With zero hesitation, he abandoned Dwayne, charging forward to save his boo. Speaking of the baddie, she mobilized her sand skill, using its power to slow down her demise. Kara also helped, directing her fireballs at Priyanka. However, despite their efforts, it was clear that if things didn't change, then the baddie would die. The death knell had truly been rung. Jeong, spawning the fuck in, lunged at Bronzy, his sword slashing for her neck. Nevertheless, the baddie completely ignored him, as if she believed his attack would never land. True to her belief, Stepan jumped in, kneeing the hell out of our boy. With that well-timed interception, Maytal was once again in danger, her future proving more uncertain. Dwayne, charging in, cursed silently, his face a mess of panic. If they didn't do something, then Maytal was sure to die. Well, re-die. Since the baddie had already died before.